Alright, hey, what is up, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today's video will be the start of the podcast coming back. I know you guys are excited for this one. I'm excited for it to truly excited to bring these podcasts back for you guys. So if you're ready to go, I'm ready to go. Let's get this podcast underway. We're going to be talking about some of the world's most haunted and famous places, creepy, ghostly, and notorious spots. The first one we're going to be talking about today is called the Fearsome Fort in Craig the Rock Castle in British Columbia, Canada, on Vancouver Island. So here we go. Do you see the late Joan Dunsmuir? Reads the caption on a photo supposedly showing the ghost of a woman in Craig the Rock Castle, the National Historic Site and Museum on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. Though ghost photos are taken in supposedly haunted spots all over the world, they often involve tricks of the light or some say photoshopped. But in this castle there may well be spectral selfies built by coal magnate Robert Dunsmuir. The Scottish baronial castle was completed in 1890, but the industrialist died before he could move in. His wife Joan took possession but died herself in 1908. When not posing for photos, Joan's ghost has been seen descending the main staircase in a ball gown, and her tallow candles have been smelled on the second floor. She does not seem to be alone in the basement. There is a spirit of a little girl who has been seen staring sadly at the floor, and the crying of a child and music from a playerless Steinway piano are sometimes heard echoing among the ornate woodwork and Victorian stained glass in the mansion's 39 rooms. Plenty of other spots on Vancouver Island are said to be haunted too, such as Cameron Lake, for one, is the site of a wide range of reported paranormal activity, and the ghost of a Hawaiian axe murderer supposedly haunts the forests of Newcastle Island Park. Nearby Vancouver's Dead Man's Island, once a burial ground for everyone from Indians to early settlers, as well as a quarantine station for smallpox victims, is now home to the haunted HMCS Discovery, a Royal Canadian Navy Reserve Division and shore facility. Many reservists have experienced unexplained activity here, including the very Vancouver Courier, disembodied voices, apparitions, and even moving furniture. But at least one witness wanted further proof. She said, "If I have an encounter with a ghost, I won't change," a seaman said. "I want the whole effect." Yeesh. The next one is a all popular horror house, the Amityville Horror House in Long Island, New York. This is a very popular site for paranormal activity, and also a very popular site for one of the worst murders in U.S. history. On November 13th, 1974, 23-year-old Ronald Defoe Jr. slaughtered the other 6 members of his family at 112 Ocean Avenue in the village of Amityville, New York. 1 year later, newlyweds George and Kathy Lutz bought the murdered family's stately waterside Dutch colonial, its bargain basement price outweighing its gruesome reputation. Moving in with Kathy's 3 children from a previous marriage, the Lutzes soon they later claimed began experiencing phenomena that had nothing to do with the everyday horrors of home ownership. Some examples are red eyes were seen at the windows, swarms of flies ooze seeping through the walls, cloven hoofs in the snow, and a sepulchral voice screaming, "Get out!" One theory behind the events was that Ronald Defoe Jr. was no mere a psychopath, but somehow possessed by the house's evil spirits, which may have emanated from the ancient Indian burial ground it was allegedly built on top of. Pleading insanity, Defoe said he heard voices that told him to kill his family. Unwilling to fall victim to the same forces, the Lutzes fled the house, leaving all of their possessions behind a mere 28 days after they had just moved into the house. What began as a family tragedy soon morphed into a pop culture juggernaut. In 1977, the book The Amityville Horror became not merely a bestseller, but a bona fide phenomenon. In 1979, the movie adaptation became the first entry in a wildly successful horror franchise that has continued for decades and still continues to this day. From the beginning, the alleged supernatural events were dogged by controversy, with some calling the whole thing a hoax. Defoe, for his part, later disavowed his demon defense, but it would have been a risk, to say the least, for the Lutzes, who were hardly wealthy, to leave behind a house they had just bought, staking their future on an elaborate lie. This was not, at any rate, your garden variety house flipping. To the end of their days, the Lutzes insisted that their story was true. Kathy died in 2004, whereas she was followed by George in 2006. As to the horror house used in the movie, in 2012, it was on the market with its original asking price of $1.45 million, then later reduced to $955,000. Just 4 years later, it was listed again for $850,000, then lowered to $605,000 in 2017. Whew. This is another one that is pretty wicked, to say the least. It's also another known location, if you guys know it, in West Bengal, India. It's called Creepy Kolkata. On May 7, 2015, a subway motorman pulled the emergency brake. Pulled the emergency brake between Kolkata's Naji Bahavan and Rabindra Sadan stations, bringing his train to a sudden halt. The reason was he'd seen a man walking along the tracks just ahead, but after a search for the figure, nothing turned up. The motorman and the local press were moved to label the entity a ghost, commonly called the suicide paradise. because so many people kill themselves there. The Rabindra Sedan subway station is just one of the many supposedly haunted spots in India's largest city, the capital of West Bengal. Haunted houses in India don't have just one ghost, wrote Sandra Roy, a former resident of Kolkata. It could be a whole family, but you have to watch out for the very dangerous Nishi, who call people by name in the dead of night and lead them away never to be seen again. One of the most commonly noted spook sites here is the Writers' Building, formerly home of the British East India Company's administrative staff. In December of 1930, 3 Indian freedom fighters shot Lieutenant Colonel N.S. Simpson, the Inspector General of Prisons, known for torturing many prisoners. No one claims that Simpson's ghost haunts the old structure, but sounds of crying spirits allegedly disrupt the night. The obsessively neat wife of British colonial administrator Lord Metcalfe is said to roam the halls of the National Library, sometimes whispering in readers' ears. Other eerie spots include the South Park Street Cemetery, perhaps haunted by the many British soldiers who are buried there, and the Royal Calcutta Turf Club, where a ghostly white mare supposedly gallops around the racecourse at night under the Howrah Bridge, a favorite spot for suicides. Wrestlers who practice on gates, the stairs descending to the Hughley River, have seen hands flailing in the water at night. Like many ancient cities, Kolkata is also supposedly home to its share of black magic. The Agoras, members of the Tantric Hindu sect whose holy men eat human flesh at cremation grounds, are said to frequent the crematorium at Nimtala Ghat. As the Bengali writer Trayakayanth Mukhopadhyay once wrote, there is no dearth of darkness in our country. Oof. This one is called The Demonic Domain in the Ruins of Babylon. About 60 miles from Baghdad lies what's left of Babylon, the city where Hammurabi and Nebuchadnezzar once ruled, now a patch of barren land and plundered treasure. The legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, are lost to history, of course, but the famed Ishtar Gate was taken by the Germans in the early 20th century, and Turks used brick steel marked with his name to build the dams on the Euphrates. In 1985, Saddam Hussein began remaking the site in his own megalomaniacal image. The American invasion put an end to this in 2003, but the troops brought their own depredations, building a helicopter landing pad over ruins and crushing ancient pavement with heavy vehicles. It wasn't long before graffiti marked the site. Ancient Babylonians believed the destruction of sacred idols meant their divinities had abandoned them to evil forces. And it's not hard to imagine that this ravaged wasteland is haunted by the likes of the Akimu, the restless spirits of souls who were not properly buried, demons who haunt abandoned places, and Alu, faceless creatures who crush sleeping humans. Let's not forget that Pazazu, the possessing spirit which was in the movie The Exorcist, was a Babylonian demonic god. Jinn, which is a spirit I have in one of my dolls. Supernatural creatures of Arabic mythology may also linger here, since they're known to haunt ruins. And no, this isn't just an ancient superstition. In November of 2014, the residents of Kut, a city about 90 miles from the Babylonian ruins, became convinced that a jinn spirit was burning their houses. Ooh. Trying to find some more for you guys that are... Here we go. The Ghost of the Gorge in Table Mountain. Table Mountain has its own distinct cloud cover known as the tablecloth. Ancient inhabitants thought this was the result of their mantis god extinguishing a fire, while the most recent story attributes the phenomenon to a smoking contest between a legendary pirate and the devil himself. Oh Lord, that's just the intro. Here comes the rest. If you climb Platyclip Gorge to the top of Table Mountain, Cape Town's iconic cloud-shrouded backdrop, you will pass an abandoned house in the woods. Though it once supposedly belonged to a wine merchant, the ruins are now rumored to be the haunt of Anchi Somers, according to Carrie Hampton's Table Mountain to Cape Point, a slave who died from overwork and who now appears as an often mischievous, sometimes destructive spirit. Angel just might pelt you with stones on your way to the summit. Indeed, she is something of what they call a local boogie woman. Misbehaving children are warned to be good, or Anchi Somers will come get you. But she may not be your only companion on the gorge, which is known to be a favorite haunt of mountain ghosts. One such spirit is thought to be that of a boy who plays a ghostly flute in Verlatonbush, the bush of the Forsaken. According to the legend, the name was given when a man who held a grudge against the governor gave the official's son a flute that had been infected by a leper. After contracting the thin, incurable disease, the boy spent the rest of his life, and perhaps eternity, playing his flute inside the forest. Though it's also supposedly home to ancient demons, light beings, and giants. Table Mountain now offers such modern amenities as souvenir shops and restaurants serving the likes of ostrich sausage subs. You can picnic, but it's a national park and a World Heritage Site, so those who leave their trash behind should watch out for the evil spirits. Whew. The next one we're going to be doing is Montreal's haunted hospital, the Old Royal Victoria, in Quebec, Canada. Montreal's Royal Victoria Hospital in Quebec, Canada is just one of the many supposedly haunted structures in the province's largest city. The Mount Royal Cemetery also has the ghost of an Algonquin Indian who supposedly lurks on the cliffs. The Queen Elizabeth Hotel has a wandering woman in white, and 242 William Street is allegedly home to the ghost of a decapitated prostitute, Mary Gallagher, who spends eternity looking for her missing head. Ooh. Now let's get into some of the history on the hospital. Looming over the city on the south slope of Mount Royal, the Vic saw plenty of distressed patients during its 122-year history, but some of them may have never checked out, though presumably not because they liked the food. After one man died in the cardiac unit, the nurses shut his door, but when they returned with his family, they found the room locked from the inside. A napping nurse once woke to see a white smoky light hovering above her, followed by two other apparitions. And one patient claimed that after speaking to the specter of an old woman, he found himself lying in a pool of blood. In addition to the usual knockings and flickering lights, the Vic once contained a haunted painting. According to McGill University's Health Center's website, it showed a house in which patients saw a sinister old woman staring from the windows a few times. She even left the house and looked around before going back inside. Not surprisingly, the animated art was removed. In April of 2015, the operating hospital of the Vic was moved to a new location. And while McGill announced in 2018 plans to turn the area into a world-class pavilion for research, one thing is certain: the hospital's persistent patients may never be discharged. Right, let's go to the next one. Otherworldly of New Orleans, Louisiana. Whew. A ghostly figure walks Pirates Alley, formerly home to the likes of William Faulkner, who wrote his first novel there. The interior of the New Orleans Historic Voodoo Museum and the St. Louis Cemetery, where the #1 voodoo queen, Marie Laveau, is interred. Youch. Alright, let's read. What major U.S. city advertises rental apartments as haunted or not haunted, as if ghosts were amenities like air conditioning or a 24-hour doorman? If you guessed Boston, you're wrong. We're talking, of course, about probably one of the most haunted places in America, New Orleans, Louisiana, where spirited real estate sales are among the many reasons why the port city between the Mississippi River and Lake Pontchartrain is considered the most unearthly urban enclave in the United States. How did the Crescent City become a ghost town? Well, maybe it has something to do with its multicultural mix of spiritual traditions, including Native American, French, Spanish, Creole, Cajun, and not least voodoo, an amalgam of African religions and Catholicism. Or maybe it's the fact that because the water table is so high, tombs called cities of the dead are all built above ground, leaving restless spirits to roam the steamy streets. There's a ghost story or a library of them on virtually every corner in New Orleans. From the spirit of a suicide that haunts the Louisiana National Guard Armory to the legend of the voodoo queen Mary Laveau, interred in St. Louis Cemetery. Not long ago, a New York magazine editor in the city for a convention crawled into her hotel bed one night and immediately felt the presence of a man beside her. When he wrapped his arms around her, she was too terrified to scream and stayed awake in his arms until sunrise, when he vanished. Maybe hotels here should take a cue from rentals advertising haunted and unhaunted rooms along with continental breakfast. Yeesh. And we'll do one more on this podcast, and that'll be it for this podcast. We're going to end it off with another goodie. This is called The Witch Hunt Village in Salem, Massachusetts. The devil came to me and bid me serve him, said Tituba, the Caribbean slave who was working for Salem Village's minister Samuel Parris, when his young daughter and niece began to suffer fits. In the winter of 1692, supposedly influenced by the Bajan woman's fortune-telling, the girls and their friends were soon called victims of witchcraft. Thus the town's notorious witch hysteria began, driven by ever-increasing accusations from the coterie of possessed girls. The Salem court convicted and hanged 19 townspeople who was found guilty of witchcraft in 1692. But not all these souls went publicity to their unhallowed graves. In fact, 3 of them uttered curses that some believe afflict Salem still to this day. A beggar named Sarah Good, having lost her unborn child in jail after being convicted of witchcraft in June of 1692, was brought to Gallows Hill with 4 other witches in July, when Reverend Nicholas Noyes tried to elicit a confession. A furious Good shouted, "I am no more a witch than you are a wizard, and if you take away my life, God will give you blood to drink." In 1717, so tradition holds, Noyes suffered an internal hemorrhage and choked to death on his own blood. More than 100 years later, Nathaniel Hawthorne, a descendant of the witch-hunting judge John Hawthorne, used this curse to fuel the plot of his 3rd novel, The House of the Seven Gables, the name of a Salem house that still stands today. In the introduction to the Scarlet Letter, Hawthorne apologized for his ancestors' actions. A so-called warlock hurled imprecations to the elderly Giles Corey shouted as he was fatally crushed under stones placed on wooden planks in a field near Howard Street. There's more to this too. A lot more. On Gallows Hill in Salem, Massachusetts in 1949, a tombstone in the old burying point, also known as Charter Street Cemetery, the resting place of many involved in the witch hunts. Giles Corey was an elderly suspected warlock put to death during the Salem witch trials by being crushed to death. What I just said. And we got a whole nother page, so let's get into it. Possibly the site of the current Howard Street Cemetery. I curse you and Salem, Hawthorne again. Tradition was long current that the ghost of Giles Corey, the wizard, appeared on the spot where he had suffered as the precursor of some calamity that was impending over the community. He was reportedly seen, for instance, in the Howard Street Cemetery the night before the Great Salem Fire of July 25th, 1914, which left half the town homeless. Corey was tortured for 2 or 3 days by High Sheriff George Corwin, who was ostracized by the town after the trials. When Corwin died of a heart attack in 1696, his family, not wishing to risk a vandalized grave, interred him in his basement on the same site now occupied by the Joshua Ward House. Naturally, or should we say supernaturally, it is haunted. In the 1970s, according to Rosemary Ellen Gulley, author of Haunted Salem, the last man to serve in the office of sheriff, Robert Ellis Cahill, investigated the curse and wrote that all sheriffs, as far back as he could trace, either died in office of heart problems or retired with an alignment of the blood. In 1978, Cahill's own stint as sheriff was cut short by a heart disease. Another accused witch seemed to predict a future conflagration. "This town shall burn," shouted Wilmot Red, who was among the final 8 victims to be hanged on Gallows Hill on September 22nd, 1692. Many years later, of course, Salem did end the aforementioned fire, but none of these doomed townsfolk would ever have thought to curse Salem with tourist brochures calling it bewitching, not to mention a 3D haunted adventure or a terror house that claims we're bringing scary back. One doubts Corey's ghost would agree with that assortment. There is even, heaven forbid, a statue of Elizabeth Montgomery, star of TV's Bewitched, honoring the episodes of the popular show that were shot in the village in 1692. Also, sewing pins were supposedly used by witches to torture their victims. A minister, John Hale, a minister who supported the trials until his second wife was accused of witchery, an event that helped bring an end to the hysteria and deaths. Wow. What some weird, creepy places. But guys, that's going to do it for today's podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. And I look forward to seeing y'all next week on next week's podcast. Hope you guys have a good one. I'll see you guys next week.